get started.
They are.
Right, good evening, everyone. It is Monday, August 22nd. It is 5:31 p.m. and I'm going to call to order this meeting of the school board. This is a public meeting of the West Bend's Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, date, place, and subject matter of this meeting is posted at the entrance doors of the Education Service Center and at the West Bend Community Memorial Library. The copy was also sent to the Daily News, WIBD, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources that have requested notice of our meetings. And I'll ask our superintendent to confirm that this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Great, thank you. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We recognize the quorum of our board with all 7 members present. And with that, our next agenda item is to approve the agenda, which was circulated in advance and posted. I would move to approve this agenda. Would there be a second?
Second.
Thank you, Nancy. Motion and second to approve the agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and our agenda is approved. We move on to public participation. I did not receive any public participation comment cards. Let's pause for a second just to make sure. Seeing none, we will move forward then with our consent agenda. And on our consent agenda, we have several items. Minutes from the August 8th regular board meeting and the executive session after. Minutes of the August 17th special board meeting. We have 6 contracts, 1 resignation, no retirements. We also have approval of 2 contracts for district employed drivers. And then also the Cooperative Educational Service Agency, also known as CESA 6, service agreement for approval. And that is what we have on our consent agenda. Any questions on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Motion second to approve the consent agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Which then takes us to the Superintendent Jen Women's report.
Good evening. Just a reminder that we are in the countdown to back to school. I know families are as well. Our high school has an open house on Wednesday from 3 to 7 p.m. So we would encourage all of our students and families to go get acquainted with classroom locations, do a meet and greet of their teachers, learn about all the different clubs, athletics, co-curriculars that are offered at the high school so you can start getting engaged. And remember that this year there is a mini day for freshmen. That will be held on August 31st from noon to 3:30 p.m. It's a great way. They've got a lot of activities, special activities for freshmen. They'll go through a mini schedule just to make sure you know where everything is that first day, get out any of those jitters, but also to get connected, engaged, and make sure that they know how to navigate not just the campus, but again, all those opportunities, clubs, co-curriculars, how they can be involved. So that's really exciting. Our elementary school meet and greets will be Monday, August 29th from 4 to 6 p.m. I believe teacher assignments will be posted Wednesday the 24th, so you can see which classrooms you're reporting to. The Silverbrook and Badger meet and greets are Monday, August 29th from 5 to 7 p.m. So a lot of great kind of getting oriented and acclimated, dropping off all those school supplies so you're not having to navigate that first day. If you can't make an event, if you miss picture day or something like that, please feel free to reach out to connect with your school so you know when makeup is, or they can accommodate you in some way. So we want to make sure kids have their supplies and things in place and they're feeling ready for the school year. It's fall. I know some of the temperatures don't feel that way, but all of our fall athletics have begun. A lot of great events going on. We have varsity volleyball and 2 football games this week, as well as our JV contest. So all of our North Shore Conference participants, including East and West, are going to be using an electronic ticketing system. For many in the conference, you've probably run into that before. We'll be implementing that this year, but check out the website for details how to purchase tickets for fall sports are football, soccer, swim, dive. There's even more online, so just take a look. You can purchase with a credit or debit card, and then we'll also accept cash at those preliminary games to help people become accustomed to the system and things of that nature. But also just a reminder that senior citizens, all events are free. too, so just show that, unless it's a specialty conference meet or something that requires tickets like a play. Cedar citizens are welcome, students are free with their school IDs. And then encourage families to look at and investigate a family pass, which is just $100 for the whole family. So attend a few events and that pays for itself, or an adult annual pass at $35. So check out the athletic websites. We look forward to that. Again, we'll accept both cash and those debit or credit cards during transition periods. I know, and families should be prepared if you're going to away games, they're a card only at some of them. We'll try and make sure when we know that to post that as people transition. When we talk about transitioning the school year, Lenny's talked about it before, but we're still hiring a few of those support staff positions. Go Right Way is always looking for drivers, especially for specialty events. If you want to sign on to just, do co-curricular athletic transportation, maybe not a daily route, or you're interested in being a sub, check out our website where we link you to Go Right Way's information. But also we're looking for substitute teachers, aides, and nutrition workers, both full or part-time status. So check that out. Again, if you're not looking for a full-time employment, you can be a substitute in any one of those positions as well. So take a look, let us know if you're interested. If you want to learn more, feel free to give us a call in HR. We're happy to let you know all the different ways you could serve in our schools. And then we have been welcoming our leadership team, so we pre-met with administrators a few times this summer to do different trainings and updates. We just went through all of our safety planning. Dave Ross leads that. We went through a lot of different onboarding, we call it some of the operational things. Andy's finalizing budgets with those school sites. And then we did a pre-meeting before we gathered all leadership teams for the district. So each school has its own leadership team where they really dig in, analyze data, and think about and plan for and have conversations for the year ahead. So looking at setting their goals. So that's foundational work that they're starting. They'll continue that in fall. And then we'll start up right away again with some school specific presentations at the board so that we can dig in and talk about what their goals are for the year and do more of a kind of beginning of the year and then a follow-up at the end of the year so we can celebrate progress. So those are all the things that we're gearing up for when it comes to opening school. Any questions from anyone?
Any questions? All right, thank you for your report. We'll move on then to our action items. The first action item is pharmacy insurance vendor renewal. This is a topic that we had received some information, I believe it's the last board meeting, and I think even the meeting before that. And Mr. Lenny Hansen, our Director of HR, is here to walk us through this topic. Good evening.
Good evening. Yes, we reviewed this at the last meeting. So as we talked about, pharmacy coverage is one of kind of a three-legged stool that builds our entire health insurance plan, which is the combination of medical insurance, which is provided through UMR. We have our pharmacy insurance, which is currently provided through OptumRx, and then our stop loss insurance plan. So pharmacy renewal is coming up for the start of the new calendar year. Our plan operates on a calendar year, and we are ending a 3-year agreement with OptumRx to serve as the pharmacy carrier. We collected quotes and bids from a variety of different players in that industry. The lowest priced quote was with a renewal with OptumRx. As I talked about last time, you can never totally predict what your pharmacy costs are going to be from one year to the next, but what we do when we price this is we take the prior year's drug claims and then basically plug them into the system at the new pricing that's applied to us, and then it gives us at least an estimate if the same prescriptions were filled around what we would have paid. In that scenario, it showed we would have paid about $188,000 less in drug costs, and then another $90,000 less on top of that due to another kind of behind-the-scenes program that we would implement with the renewal that basically allows OptumRx to engage in a different type of negotiation with the actual drug manufacturers. So there's lots of programs like that in this industry. It's a very competitive industry, lots of things that go on behind the scenes between drug manufacturers, insurance providers, and so on. But altogether, a projected savings of what would be around $275,000. So our recommendation stays the same as when we brought this forth for discussion last time, which is to renew with OptumRx would go January 1st of 2023 all the way till the end of 2025. So here to answer questions. Otherwise, the administration would recommend approval of that agreement.
Any questions?
We use OptumRx at Delta Defense, and I like renewing also for the reason that it keeps continuity for the staff. Don't have to learn something new.
Yeah, as we talked about last time, 3 years ago when we brought OptumRx forward, we were proposing a switch. We moved from one of the other big players in this industry. And certainly we do everything we can to make that as painless of a transition as you can, but it's never completely painless when you're transitioning something that, you know, you have thousands of different prescriptions filled in a year. So certainly it was a double benefit, the fact that not only was this the lowest cost option, but then it also provides that continuity.
Can you remind me, I think OptumRx has a program where they'll try medications or encourage trying medications that are maybe readily available, lower price, before just immediately jumping to a more expensive medicine. Can you remind me
Yep,
about
so
that?
there's several cost control programs. You're talking about one of their step therapy programs, and they have different types of step therapy programs depending on the illness, right? So there's different step therapy programs for asthma, diabetes, things like that, so that the programs are really kind of designed specific to that illness, right? Because certainly the types of drugs used for different illnesses can, as well as the delivery mechanisms for them, can really vary from one illness to another. So they have actually a lot of programs like that. So basically, if a doctor might write a prescription for the most expensive drug in the market to treat that illness, if there is an equivalent drug or generally equivalent drug in the market first, the OptumRx will actually have the employee and their doctor work together to first try the less expensive drug. And then if they find that there isn't, you know, the resolution that you would get with the other drug, they are then able to kind of step up, which is why it's called step therapy, to the next level and so on, so that you're not immediately going to that most expensive prescription, but starting perhaps at some lower cost options. But it also doesn't take the individual's doctor out of the equation, right, and make the decision and say, well, we don't care what your doctor says. It just says, let's go through this process together, and certainly the doctor is continuing to be involved in that process. So good balance between cost control as well as respecting that employee-provider relationship.
Other questions? So administration's recommendation is for a 3-year contract renewal, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
I would move to approve a 3-year contract renewal for OptumRx to serve as the district's pharmaceutical insurance vendor as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Connie. Motion and second to approve a 3-year contract renewal for OptumRx. Any final discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thank you, appreciate your presentation. Now we'll hear from Mr. Andy Sarno, our Assistant Superintendent of Business and Operations, to walk us through another topic that we had a preview of last time, which is agenda, resolutions, and budget for our annual meeting on September 26, 2022. Good evening.
Evening. Thank you, sir. Good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Wimmer. Largely unchanged. I'll point out the one area where there was a very small, slight edit per the discussion from 2 weeks ago. But attached is the recommendation for the evening's agenda for both the budget hearing as well as the annual meeting. Start out with registration for the meeting at 6 o'clock, again September 26th at the Silver Lining Arts Center at our auditorium. But start out with our public budget hearing at 6:30. That typically lasts about 30 minutes. Once it's complete, or waiting until 6 or 7 o'clock, will be the annual meeting. We have a few resolutions that are included in that, as well as a state of the district. But starting with resolution number 1, unchanged, I will be presenting these dollar amounts at our September 12th meeting leading into that. So this will be finalized. Still waiting for some estimates either from the DPI, even through our budget forecast model. As we receive information, we can calculate some of this to finalize it. I just don't like to over or under promise. It's a little bit of a thing where I like to be as precise as possible, but we will have that for the September 12th meeting. Second resolution, again, in similar to what we did last year, is realigned with the school board policy for the disposal of assets. And so very similar to this, this then allows us to utilize that board policy moving forward. Unless that board policy goes away, we have the ability to bring items forward to the board once they meet a certain threshold moving forward. Item number 3, and this is where the one change was made per discussion. I moved forward with adding the current compensation of $5,000 for members or $5,200 for officers. That's what was changed last year, and I have a little bit of the history in the blue language dating from 2014-15 when it was half that amount for the last several years. Last piece of this is just talking about board members traveling and acting on behalf of the district. So we only have 3 resolutions at this point in time. On the horizon, we have, or what I would say next is that budget itself.
So we pause for a question.
Absolutely, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
Is it possible to include in the administrator notes that the community approved annual meeting resolution, in addition to that, add that it was also community proposed and nominated in addition to being community approved? Because that did not come from
Absolutely.
this board. Thank you.
So that would be part of the administrator notes, not a part of the technical resolution itself, but as the notes, all right?
Yep.
Thank you, Tony. As long as we pause, other questions in the interim, otherwise I think you've got a little bit more to your presentation.
Very brief.
Go ahead.
Yep. I just wanted to make sure that folks knew what was on the horizon. So the budget meeting itself requires 1 notice in the paper. So we'll make sure that happens 10+ days before the meeting. Second piece is the annual meeting itself. Very brief, just a little notice out to the community, 2 of them, called the Class 2 notice. One has to be at least 8 days in advance of the meeting. The second one has to be at least more than 1 day. We'll make sure that those are properly noticed in the paper and published accordingly. And then the last piece is just making sure that we start here very soon on a comprehensive budget and annual meeting document. It's going to be a little bit more thorough than it has been the last several years. We've had that 11/17. We open it up, a few inserts that are the revenue limit, the budget publication, the agenda. I'm going to have more of a traditional packet that we previously had. Some graphs, some breakout of how we're spending the money, where the money's coming from. It's going to be a lot of the same information that we've already included on our budget webpage on the district, but just including just a little bit more information. So over the last year, I've done some research on what looks good and what is received well in communities. So we're going to take advantage of that and include that for our annual meeting this year. Happy to answer any other questions.
Yeah, can you go over the tax levy section where we're missing dollar amounts?
Yeah.
What's missing there and what is supposed to be implied of,
Yep.
How, I guess I don't see how we can vote on this if we don't have actual numbers.
Yeah,
And
so-
maybe I would suggest we move this to the September 12th meeting that you said you'd have the numbers for.
Yep. So you guys are not, and this is one of those conundrums that I have, is you guys are voting in support of bringing this language as stated forward for the community to actually vote on. The vote of the language saying, I support that, move forward with that, it's a little bit, and I don't know if Superintendent Wimmer has seen this in other districts as well.
Right, so as Andy's saying, right now, we want you to look at the different resolutions, the language, those pieces, give your approval for that, because we have to execute on several public notices. He will have all the information, so we're not beholden, we're not gonna drop numbers in there and not have authorization by the board. You then, after September 12th, you'll reauthorize those amounts. So the board actually has 2 pieces to authorize. So we're going through really the resolutions that are on there, not to be confused with sometimes boards write resolutions of statements of belief, things like that. These are tied to the annual meeting and very specific to how we're going to execute functions. So again, right now, if you think about it, and we could put something in, approving the language and making sure that we're stands, dollar amounts, and that would come before the board on the September 12th. That would be the piece. So it's not, like you said, doesn't look like we're being disingenuous. We're approving these pieces of it right now.
Other questions? All right, well, hearing none, I move to approve the agenda, resolutions, and budget information for the annual meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Joel. Motion and second to approve the agenda, resolutions, and budget information for the annual meeting. Just for point of clarification, with numbers to be, dollar numbers to be supplied and approved by the board in the future meeting. Great.
I'm gonna abstain from the vote.
All right, very good. We have a motion and a second. Any final discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll mark Mr. Donaldson is abstaining. That motion carries. Thank you. All right, we are on to discussion item. And our first discussion item, I think it's our only discussion item, but a very important discussion item, is facilities update and implications for capital budgeting. And Superintendent Weber, I'm not sure if you want to kick this off or if Dave should kick this off. Go ahead.
Nope, as they get ready, Dave Ross, our Director of Facilities and Operations, will be taking a deep dive into this piece. But as Board President Zweigart and I kind of meet and talk about and shape agendas and getting information, tonight Dave intends to provide kind of a process overview, a look back where we've been, all the work that we've done since some key moments, which were, referenda of the past, and then as well as a task force that was generated by the community and just all the work that's been done. And he's got some sample reports. Board President and I are eager to hear your thoughts because we envision then, once we kind of build background and some general pieces, solicit more questions, and then plan a board work session where we could do a little bit deeper of a dive. So we'd be interested in, and Dave can take questions throughout, and those we don't have answers for, we can certainly gather. But I know in our preparation, we'd be eager to hear from the board around, what does the next steps look like, whether it's questions or a follow-up board work session. So Dave, I'll let you take that away.
Thanks, and as Jen said, please, if you have any questions, let us know right away. So I wanted to start with just a few basic facts about our district. We serve a number of communities in the area, encompassing about 105 square miles. We have 1.2 million square feet of facilities. We have 821,000 square feet of roofing that we have to maintain. And what that means is that if we were on a 20-year cycle with every roof in this district, we would have to spend about $600,000 per year on roofing alone if roofing came in at $15 a square foot, which is a little on the light side right now. 29 acres of paved area, again, it's a big number, but until you can kind of square it away in your own head, that's equal to about 12 and a half miles of 2-lane paved highway. So again, it's a large area, and then overall the district is about 200 acres total. So we want to take a quick look at how we're doing with enrollment this year. And actually our numbers are up in a lot of locations. Still getting numbers in a lot of places, but we are seeing a little bit of an upward trend that we haven't seen in the past few years. Last 2 weeks ago, we talked about capital budgeting, how it all affects the overall budget, and what we've done with our capital budgets. And as you can see, in 2008, 2009, the board made a commitment to start with $1 million and raise that 4% every year thereafter. And as Andy pointed out like I said 2 weeks ago, that the capital budget really affects our overall budget in as much as that money comes out of our operating funds. But prior to 2008, 2009, there was less than $500,000 spent per year. Overall, the district square footage was a little bit smaller, but not much. And if you look at it, that really started us out in 2008, 2009 in a $2 million hole.
When you hired Dave?
Yeah.
For what?
Yeah, I didn't quite realize what the hole was that I was stepping into. There's some problems, but there are a lot of things that we have managed to accomplish as a board, as a district over the last 10, 12 years. I kind of went back to about 2010 as my starting point, but we've made a lot of improvements in areas throughout the district, at the elementary level, at the high school. Our athletic facilities are better than they were. Our pool, along with, has improved. We've had a lot of help from community partners, whether it be West Bend Mutual or the group that formed when there was actually talk of closing the pool, and that was the West Bend Pools for Schools. But a lot of great community support. The Gridiron Club with the turf field, just a lot of things. And then a lot of things that nobody gets to see, but if they weren't done, these buildings would not be fun places to be because they'd be cold and there'd be water coming in. So again, there's been a lot of stuff accomplished, despite the fact that there's still a lot that needs to be done. So one of the things I wanted to go over with you and make sure that I'm on the right track and make sure that I'm providing you with the right information is I selected Decorah because it's our first building in line, but I wanted to give you a narrative of what exists in the building already. We have to really understand what we have and be able to articulate what that is and make sure that everything is described accurately. So as part of the narrative, we like to include some basic facts about the building, the overall square footage, site acres, years of construction, and really what the overall age by percentage of the building is. In Decorah's case, 80%, 81% of the building is 51 years or older, and just about 20% is between 41 and 50 years. So Decorah is one of our older buildings overall. The next thing I wanted to touch on was site conditions. That is a consideration of how we do things. Space utilization. We may have 54,000 square feet, but how is it being utilized, which is really important. How our building is aged, when it was added on to. Kind of a rundown of our capital budget on our largest expenses. So for example, I use roofing because that fully takes a third of our budget. We watch that very carefully. Keeping the water out is important, just to make sure that we have a good environment for students and staff, but also just to make sure that we don't deal with issues of mold and other issues in buildings. We look at utilities, make sure that the building is performing as well as it does. And then we look at what we've managed to accomplish, what has been done, what it costs, and then look at what our forecasts are for things going forward. So for our space utilization, everything is color-coded. We basically put everything into a department. And we do this for all our buildings. So for example, you can see that the red color is first grade. So we have 4 first grade classrooms. And then the total area is calculated for each of those spaces. One of the things that really took me by surprise, and has grown over the years, is the amount of space that's being utilized for special ed and student support. Generally, these are areas that are small group activities, but because of the way the building is configured and the way things are set up, we're using full classrooms for that kind of thing because we don't have space that's appropriately designed for the use. PE is another area that puts a squeeze on things. We have a gym that serves as both a cafeteria and a gymnasium and an auditorium. We like to refer to it as a cafegimatorium, but that really puts a squeeze on the programming because we have to have lunches in there, either 2 or 3 periods a day, and to be able to get the required PE classes in is a stretch. It pushes us into using secondary spaces. In the fall and spring, it's not a problem, but when it's 10 below outside and people can't go outside, it does provide or give us a bit of a problem. As I said, have to be conscious of when additions were put on, how they were put on, how thoughtfully they were done. As you can see, in 68, there was a large addition put on. The numbers above the years are actually the project numbers, so that it's easy for us to go back and see if we have a problem in an area, we can pull the blueprints and see exactly what we're dealing with. Again, one of our major expenses is roofing. We try to keep up on it. Generally, we figure about 20 years out of a roofing system. At Decorah, we've got one section that is in excess of 20 years, and a couple or 3 sections that are approaching 20 years, so they're actually at about 19 right now. So, you know, a total of what, just about half of the roof at Decorah is pushing its expected useful life cycle. And again, it's 23,000 square feet at $15 plus a square foot. Our energy consumption is something we always try to keep a handle on. It's been interesting over the last couple of years with COVID, because we have actually run our units longer and increased our minimum outside air by 10%, just to make sure that we are flooding the area, making sure that everything is well ventilated. This graph basically shows, we started benchmarking this in, I want to say 2017, 18. So that's what the yellow line is. The bars are our usage for natural gas and electricity. So we spend about $46,000 a year last year at Decorah. Hopefully natural gas is not going to do what it did last year, but we did see a dramatic spike, both in terms of price and our usage, simply because we're ventilating more. So I didn't want to include this in the slides because it's just a large spreadsheet, but at Decorah, because of some of the changes that were made over time, we have spent $2 million since 2010 at Decorah on improvements, whether that be for moving things around, whether infrastructure, but we did have our early childhood program there. That moving that out precipitated some remodeling back in, I want to say, 11, 12. The forecast is another $4.2 million at Decorah. The thing to really think about with these dollar amounts is that the $4.2 million doesn't make anything better at Decorah. It keeps it the same. Maybe the finishes are upgraded, but that building was built in the 50s and 60s for education the way it was delivered in the 50s and 60s. That is not going to change by spending $4.2 million on it.
So 4.2 over what? Is that needed now, or is that over a period?
It's over a period of time. It's over 20, 25 years. That was one of the tasks I was given, was to develop a 25-year forecast. Now, granted, looking out probably with the way the construction industry is right now, any more than 5 years is a bit of a guess. But the numbers are order of magnitude type numbers more than actual hard and fast dollar figures.
Even when we're talking about this work, I'm just envisioning, if there are 5 furnaces at Decorah Elementary and you change the air filters, that's probably not in these numbers. But if you replaced all 5 furnaces, that probably would be in these numbers.
Absolutely.
So can you just generally describe, it's got to be big, it's got to be, you know, what qualifies, generally speaking? I'm sure it's a complicated, multi-part answer, but can you just give me a general idea of what would be included in?
What we try to do is set a threshold for capital projects of $5,000. So, like you said, Chris, things like filters, things like custodial supplies, although all at once that doesn't add up to, you know, more than $5,000 over the course of the year. Probably at Decorah we spend, I want to say, $15,000 on between paper products, disposables, cleaning products, all of those things, little pieces of custodial equipment. So if I remember correctly, just the operational side of the equation at Decorah is, and this includes utilities as well, is about $120,000. So again, you're thinking forward and you're thinking, oh, well, how much are we gonna save if we close a building? It's not a whole heck of a lot.
And one piece to point out is, you know, you're giving a highlight included in board docs is that full sample report, and the whole last 3 pages are all the line items of these numbers, past projects and the forecasted ones.
So we have 5 elementary facilities, equal about 300,000 square feet. 80% of it is over 40 years old. So there's a lot of money that's going into keeping our elementary buildings up and running and in the best shape they can possibly be in. So as Jen said, we had the private facilities task force. I think it was a couple of years, maybe 3 now, time flies when you're having fun. But they estimated that our capital maintenance budget was likely underfunded by a multiple of 2 or 3. They forecast $22.5 million in capital requirements over the next 10 years, just at the elementary building, Rolf's, ESC, and our maintenance garage. So we've done a number of things with regard to that report that the private task force gave. So we've looked at our population, we've tried to understand the development in housing, we've had presentations from the city on that, looked at property values for both this building and for Rolf's. We've spent a lot of time reviewing finances. One of the things that my department's doing is we are going in depth and looking at our facilities and going room by room. So you can kind of see the little outline at the bottom. That basically is, we look at 5 factors when we go into a room in terms of finishes. And we're looking at ceiling, lighting, the wall surface, the flooring, and basically if it's got, you know, the right amount of whiteboards, tack boards, that kind of thing. So there's a series of questions that get answered about those particular items. The software totals things up, and then it's color-coded as to good, fair, or poor, so that we can be a little bit more strategic and surgical in how we attack problems. Now, whether if you look at a room and you've got 3 things that are poor and 1 thing that's good, say it's the paint, we're going to go in and we're going to do everything in that room. We're not going to do one thing or another, but if just about everything is in a fair or good, then we're going to probably not do anything for a while until we do the next assessment and move along. And then once we have those numbers rolled in, then that rolls up into a bigger scorecard. So the one you can see up at the top, if something is in poor condition and it's a safety hazard, that gets addressed right away. And then again, whether it comes down to whether it's going to affect the mission of the district and so on down the line. So most of you will remember at another time I talked about the facility condition index. And kind of FCI measures constructed assets at a specific point in time. It's developed by the US Navy to evaluate their ships, I want to say probably in the 80s. And then the US National Association of Colleges and Universities adopted it for college facilities in the 90s. And basically what it is, it's just a ratio of repair needs against replacement value. And this is some data that some of you have seen before. It's not been updated yet, but with the FCI, unless there's been some major change, things don't get better, they only go the other way. So a 0 to 5 is good, 5 to 10 is in fair condition, 10 to 30 in poor, greater than 30 is critical. And to Joel's point, when we met a couple of weeks ago, critical does not mean the roof is going to fall in tomorrow. Critical means that there's going to be a lot of issues with that building. So I don't expect anybody to read this right now, but again, this just kind of lets people know what can be expected to building occupants when a building reaches a critical or poor condition. Again, a lot more downtime, a lot more repair costs, a lot more inconvenience, and probably a lack or a loss of potential time in the classroom if we have to shut classrooms down and move kids out. Overall, on our district, 32%, Badger and Silverbrook, buildings that were built within the last 10 years, are in good condition. This building, Rolfs and McLean, are in fair condition. Again, McLean had a sizable investment, I want to say in about 2012, when the federal government provided a lot of stimulus money for shovel-ready projects. I think it's about $3 million that went into McLean at that point. Green Tree and Decorah, they are in poor condition. They are doing okay, but there's a lot of things that need to be done. And Fair Park, Jackson, and the high school, or probably about 50% of our district, are in critical need. So those are the slides that I have for you tonight. I think, you know, after hearing the private task force, after going through Andy's presentation about capital budgeting, I think from my perspective, I think there's probably some pretty general agreement that we do have a bit of a problem here. I think the question becomes, how big is the problem? How deep is the hole? And how do we get out of it? What's the solution? So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Steve. So just to clarify, this is kind of a sample report.
Yes.
And so really, we're looking for board input to say, are there more data elements that we would like? Are there changes? Because it's the idea that then the board in the future would receive this similar type of information for each of the facilities.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong.
Yes.
Take a look at the sample report that goes through all the narratives, and again, you know, the components where he's talking about even the envelope and getting into what's the wall like, what's the roof like, how old is this HVAC, all those details for every single one. We then, for presentation purposes, as we kind of talked about in a work session, gather all the individual reports with all those elements, kind of synthesize them to get all the metrics, like you said, to identify the needs, the costs, the potential, those pieces there.
And maybe this is for Superintendent Wimmer as well, just as a point of clarification. So I know we've talked about, and I think I've asked the question before, around when we can get good population projections and such. That's not necessarily part of your report, correct? I mean, that's part of the overall analysis for needs. And so I wanted to bring that up, but
Right.
it's like, oh, population, that'd be good to have. But that's not really part of the facilities condition slice of this pie.
No, it's a piece of the puzzle. It's and it's a fairly good sized puzzle.
It is, and I just checked in with Andy Sarnell today around the ETA on that report. We did ask for an updated report to look at that, and then you work with all the various cities, townships, villages, and talk about future developments to understand, because you know, you want to know and plan for, you don't want to make any knee-jerk reactions on that. So those are all pieces that would be part of the puzzle.
So a couple more questions, and I'm not suggesting to those at home that we're running around closing a bunch of buildings. But, you know, you made a comment, hey, if we close it, we're not really saving that much money, but I'd like to see what we actually are saving. So, you know, for each building, I think it's critical. We've talked an awful lot about this building. We've talked an awful lot about Rolf's. So what does that look like if we close that? What expenses do we lose, but what expenses do we gain? For instance, obviously we have to move everyone who's been displaced by closing a building. So what does that look like? And then maybe code it such as one-time cost versus continuation cost, you know, so that we can understand, sure, to move everyone, I'm pulling numbers out there, it's a $25,000 cost or whatever it is, but that's literally a one-time cost as opposed to a continuation, so.
Right. Sure.
I think that would be critical. I'd like to see that for every building, you know, just literally show it to us. These are the operating expenses, heat, light, liability insurance, whatever it all is. I mean, literally everything, because if we close a building, we're gonna save a little more than just the utilities. There's other costs that go there.
Absolutely.
So, you know, snow removal, all of those things, so that we can completely understand, these are the savings, this is a one-time cost, this is, and then we can look at future building new versus all of those things. So, I mean,
Sure.
there's a lot that goes into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, I'm gonna have to, like, there's gonna be offsets that come with that, so they are gonna be estimates and.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, what would be the top dollar items at the schools that really need repair, you know, like especially the ones that are in the critical condition category, like what are the biggest ticket items that would need replacing or repair, you know, in the near future?
At the high school, well, we've put probably close to $500,000 into HVAC controls and boilers over the years. There are still a lot of issues with the terminal units out there, for example, VAV boxes. The ones that are there, we have got the controls to work with them, but those are all the kind of things that we're gonna have to look at. Fair Park, that is a steam heating system, and that is due for a replacement. Unfortunately, the steam system, it is a complete replacement. You can't really reutilize any of the piping because the return side has got a lot of acid in, so the pipe is, first off, it's too large, and then it's probably more a little bit like Swiss cheese than you would want on a closed hydronic system.
So with the HVAC stuff that you guys have to update, do you guys have somebody that mainly works on that, or do you guys have to hire that all out?
We have to hire it out.
So my thought wise, I mean, I don't know if you've ever looked at this, but would it be cost beneficial to actually hire an actual HVAC guy to put on staff to do the work?
We have a guy that does maintenance that does that, but you know, when you get to replacements, I mean, these are big projects that require a lot of hands. And the other thing is we have a very small window to get them done. And we basically have a 2.5-month window.
Yeah. So you don't hire any of the regular maintenance out on that stuff?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I just got a couple comments and then a question, or interesting fact. I just looked, because the West Bend Private School Task Force was referenced, and I remember that presentation. I actually even have a copy of it here. It was October 14th, 2019, and it is on our website. I just looked it up, so just people listening, and I know all the board members weren't here. It was an interesting discussion and a presentation, and I think it's about an 1.5-hour video.
I can link the
to watch.
video. I did link the report specifically in Dave's presentation, so it was just easier. So if anyone's watching tonight, I've got that directly linked. But to your point, Kurt, I'll go back and grab the video and make
Okay.
that an addition as well.
Okay,
That way
great.
you're not having to search too much.
I think it's very valuable information, and also, Dave, I just want to commend you and your team. You've been always very transparent with our buildings. Not only the private task force that did a tour, I know they got a binder of information, and some of Melanie's questions are right on with, yeah, what are the project forecasts from Decorah, and there's some big dollar items. I mean, you have it all the way out to 2026. This was a 3-year presentation, so you had it 10 years forward at each building. So again, I think many of the links are out there, but just to say, I think if we could get as many as we can updated out there would be great, because it's great information just to assess what you're pointing out on there, especially the buildings that are in either poor or critical condition.
So did you find that the narrative piece helpful at all, or is that worthwhile?
I do have one question on the narrative that I think is the most important fact, that you're saying school enrollment is trending ahead of what projections we set. I think, which is one of the variables that we're using to actually look at facilities and do we need all this space. But if we're not trending as down as we thought, so it'll be interesting to see the final enrollments. Are they 100? To me, I looked at what you have now, they're already at least 10 or 20, 30 above what we had, but is it going to be even up to 100 above what we had? Is there any comments on that?
It's again, it's just the way that the district is divided up into those attendance boundaries. There's decor is tight, whereas some other buildings like Green Tree might not be nearly as tight. Again, it's just how that moves around within our total geographic area.
So that might be another thing for probably superintendent, maybe not necessarily yourself, because I know you wouldn't want to put your name on that one, but, what does it look like if we start, I don't want to say redistricting, but I guess moving boundary lines. Obviously, the high school we know is an odd animal with the even odd day thing, but for the elementary schools, it's absolutely by zip code or geographic area. So what does that look like to try and even those out a little more? What schools have the capacity, what schools do not have the capacity? So I think that's almost a separate presentation to show us. And while I agree, 30 students doesn't sound like much in the grand scheme of things, but at a school that's already tight, that's a lot. I mean, if you're saying we have to add a whole nother 4th grade and you're like, we don't have a classroom to add a 4th grade. So I think that would be critical information for us to see as a side report.
To follow into one of Mrs. Justman's earlier questions about potential closure of a building, and this is all speculation at this point, but I think one of the interesting elements is, well, if we close the building, how much can we get for it? And I'm not asking necessarily that we get appraisals on every building. Maybe you have that. I'm not asking for that, but I would be curious to see if you could at least rate the various properties as, wow, this is in a fantastic location on a busy street corner. It could have high value on the market. Medium versus this is landlocked and nobody wants it. I'm making that up. But that would be helpful. I don't know that we need to do that for the high schools because I can't imagine that would be done, but up to you. So that would be useful, or if you have a different idea as to how to
So
convey
kind of like
that.
a desirable, pretty good, not so much.
Yeah, I think so. Tommy?
Is that something that you would want Dave to do, or a commercial realtor in town, maybe 2 or 3 commercial realtors could give their opinion for comps?
I think my thought is, and we should explore this as a board, it would be nice to have a dollar amount. I at least would like to know, all right, wow, this is more valuable or less valuable. I think reaching out perhaps to realtors to get an idea as to that would be fine. But I'm open, Tommy, to your thoughts too, of course.
Kurt, since you've looked at the report from 2019, the most recently, I seem to recall there was a section in there on the value or their perceived value of each of the buildings. I could be wrong, but.
My point is, too, I don't want to turn it into a chore, and it doesn't need to be accurate to the nearest dollar, but I do think it is relevant if we looked at, hypothetically, if there is a building that just requires a ton of upgrading or not, but it's got fantastic market value, that may be a factor, that's all.
I guess along that same line, there's one building that comes to mind that another government entity might really enjoy purchasing from us, a la Fair Park. So, I think, while some might not seem that they are necessarily the most desirable for an outside person to purchase, some might have other value, such as that one, considering you are right next to the jail and right next to the courthouse. Does the courthouse want a new neighbor? I would guess no. So would the courthouse maybe say, that makes sense for us to purchase that property and, maintain ownership there, so.
Well, and to Chris's point around, something nested in the middle of a subdivision, not a lot you can do there. These properties sitting on Main Street and directly behind us, and that, as you said, there's some inherent different scales of value in there that we can, as you said, we don't have to be held to the dollar, but make some informed assumptions around that. Because also, there would be design and transfer cost, because we're looking at, okay, exiting out district operations, where we go, there's gotta be a design build out, how much is that gonna eat of those one-time dollars, that you coop from selling a property?
Yeah, just to follow up on Tony's question, there wasn't that information in the task force.
There was not, or there was?
There was not.
There was not, okay. Great. Other questions or thoughts to guide administration? Well, thank you for your work. And I would also say, I'm assuming that the board member, an hour after this meeting, has a thought. They should funnel it through superintendent or to you and copy you, but I'm sure you're open to continued input, correct?
Correct.
All right.
I think I just, on some of those pages, there were some background photos, but the comprehensive analysis that Dave led his department through, where they went in and assessed every single thing, every fixture, provided all updates, how they're using that new system and can manage that data and reflexively look at different scenarios in planning and cost estimating, was no easy task. So I really need to applaud, with everything going on, that they were able to undertake that and execute that in a manner that's positioned us to, as you said, explore questions and have data at our fingertips. So thank you, and I know you would say that that was not a task you did alone, that was every single hand on deck, so thank you to them.
Dave, looking at like Silverbrook and Badger that are sitting at a 3%, which is obviously very, very good, those are nice buildings. So at 3%, does that mean that there's maybe some sections of roofing that's coming up to be redone? Or, again,
Absolutely.
thinking capital stuff, we're not talking about, we need new chairs in a classroom. So what would an example be of, would that number be 0 the day that the ribbon is cut and the building is brand spanking new, and then it?
Depends on your forecast timeline.
Okay.
On the day the ribbon is cut, if you're looking out, probably 5 years, you're not gonna have any capital there. There's just not gonna be. One of the things that I consciously did with Silverbrook and Badger was, to your point, was on roofing. We had roofs on Silverbrook that were 10 years old or less than 10 years. I was not gonna spend the money to tear those roofs off and give away 12 years of useful life. We're used to managing those kinds of projects where we can come in while the building's occupied and get the jobs done. So we tried to squeeze out as much as we possibly could, keep what was worth keeping and change out what was not. So roofing is a great example. All the masonry was done. I'm trying to think of maybe some other things. A water heater, maybe commercial water heater. In this community, just because of the water, we get 8 years out. That's a $10,000 item. So.
Okay, so then let me pick on the ones in the red, like Fair Park, for instance, sitting at 31. So now you're talking large sections of roofing, plumbing, you mentioned a steamer, a steam.
HVAC, and the thing with a complete HVAC project, especially in an older building like this, is you have to realize that a lot of them are, the terminal units are unit ventilators, which are a unit that sits in the room that mixes the air. But the old style unit ventilators had bookcases attached to them because there's fin tube along the whole outside wall. So when you take that old unit out, not only you take the unit out, but you take the bookcases out, you've got to replace all of those. And then you've got all the cutting and patching. So while the HVAC system alone might be, I don't know, $2 million, you've got another $750,000 or $1 million just in cutting and patching and replacing furniture. It goes along with it, patching floors, painting, all of those things.
So in a perfect world, none of our buildings would ever be in the red, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So looking out 20, 25 years at a time, if all of our buildings could be in green, yellow, and then as things start getting into orange, you're fixing those to put them back into green or into yellow, correct?
Correct.
And what would it cost us to do that every single year? Because right now we're budgeting 1.7, close to 1.8 in capital every year, and those numbers keep getting worse.
Yeah.
So what would it take a year?
If we were to start now, right here at this point, well, I can tell you that next year, because what I do with capital budgeting is I lay everything out, and then if a project doesn't get selected, put a note on it, and I'll roll it into the next year. And I started doing that a few years ago. Next year, we're gonna be in the, I wanna say $10 million range. So, and then again, we'll do another 1.5, 1.7, depending upon how the budget goes. And there'll be another $300,000 or $3 million gets kicked forward. So the problem is only gonna get worse over time. I mean,
I always look at that as, you know, we've inherited a credit card balance that we just keep making minimum payments on. So to do something, and to Dave's point, is to understand the complexity of it and then figure out how we're gonna disrupt it. We can't disrupt it without doing something significantly different so we can reset that. We can't get out of this hole without doing something to disrupt it. So then future forward, you're mindfully planning the maintenance plus the capital improvements to constantly keep yourself in the zones you want to be.
Yeah, I like that analogy because, you know, when we start talking about $10, $15 million just to try to get some of that red over to a yellow or an orange, people in the community might say, well, geez, you didn't live within your means. How did you let it get this bad? But this doesn't get bad in a matter of 3 years, 5 years. It got bad like this over 20 years, easily.
Easily. And when you look at the age of our facilities, you know, if it's your house, you know that if you have an old house, you're gonna spend a lot of money on it. Kind of look at it like, you know, we probably spend what, about $1.50-ish per square foot on capital per year in this district. I know that at my house, which was built in the 60s, I spend a lot more than that, and I don't have 6,000 kids coming in and out every day.
Your chart number, slide 4, you went back almost 20 years. And back in 04, 05, 5, 6, 7, I mean, less than $400,000 a year on capital. Now granted, they bumped it up to $1 million in 08, 09, and it's slowly been going up. We're tracking towards $2 million, but this is a 15, 20 year.
This has been a long-standing problem. I mean, when I was first hired here, there were 3 people on the board that were on the board because they were not happy with the way the facilities were being.
So let me ask you this. How about we build a new Jackson? Let's just say we get 25, 30 million bucks and build a new Jackson. That would move Jackson from way over there in the red to over here in the green. Would that be the right thing to do? Because we still have Fair Park, the high school, and now we're looking at Decorah knocking close to, or should it be an approach of where it's a little bit done all over the place?
I think that Jackson, we're going to get to a point where we have to do something big, but for the sake of the community, I don't think we can do it all at once. I think we have to lay out a mindful plan and present it over time, because again, you know, Andy's done a great job in terms of reducing that debt load. How do we get that down and still manage to keep taxes at the same level, and not get things out of balance? I don't think it's a one fell swoop and we're done. The numbers are just too big. The problem with the high school is it's 465,000 square feet. If you go to replace floor tile in there at $7 a square foot, by the time you take the old stuff out and new stuff in, you're talking a pretty big number.
Angel, just to follow up on that, on your question, your slide 4, which has the capital budget by fiscal year going on over time, I think it is an interesting hypothetical question to ask, and that is, if all of our facilities were in the green or the yellow, what would that capital budget need to be to smooth out the highs and the lows, for instance? Because my guess is it's at about, we'll call it 1.7, that's insufficient. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Right. So it would be, I think, instructive for us, because regardless of referendum or not, we need to understand what is the appropriate capital budget going forward so we don't get back into this. My guess is it's a number greater than 1.7. It'd be good to know about what that is. And I get it, I understand. It's kind of like insurance. The weather is quiet for 2 years, then all of a sudden, bang, there goes $100 million. You know, there's volatility. based on surprises that you can have from a maintenance perspective. But, generally speaking, it would be instructive to understand what that is.
As a general rule, capital budgets normally are about $3 to $4 a square foot per year.
And we're at $1.50?
About that, yeah.
So double.
Okay.
At least.
And it's helpful, I think, we need to understand, we talked a little bit about, maybe referendum down the road, but this is something that we as a board need to face year after year after year after year. So that's definitely something that I want to be sure comes out of this process regardless of anything else. So that's instructive, that's helpful. I may have some follow-up questions at future meetings on that. Hint, hint. Thank you.
Okay.
Other discussion?
Thank you to you and your team for this. These are interesting discussions to have based on the age of our buildings, how many square feet, and how many buildings we have. And then, as a board, we have to think about, these are our community assets. We all own these assets as members of this community, and what do we want them to look like? Do they need to be, just updated 70-year-old buildings that just get updates, or do we want them to look even nicer than that, or what do we want? And that's something we need to be talking to our friends and neighbors about. And, like I said, we own these are our community assets, and they're all of our responsibilities, in my opinion, to take care of and make sure they're around for a long time. So.
Well, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that these facilities are merely tools. Education is provided in them. They're kind of set in the way that education was delivered when I was in elementary school, and that's like a long time ago. It's certainly not like that today. You walk into an elementary classroom today, it's totally different, and just the way things are done are different. Like everything else in our lives, it's different than it was.
I echo the thanks of the board for your work and for your team's work. It's a lot of work to put these together, but it's a kind of a multi-dimensional problem, and it's great to have this information. It's very useful, so thank you.
Okay, so as we move forward, I'm going to concentrate on the elementary buildings and the high school, and then we'll fill in the backside with Silverbrook and Badger, and then this building involves will be kind of at the very tail end.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. Next, future agenda items and our board meeting calendar. So on September 12th, we'll have our next regular board meeting at 5:30 p.m. Here at the Education Service Center. And on September 20th, we have a curriculum committee meeting scheduled at 8 a.m. also here in the Education Service Center. And then, as Mr. Sarro had talked about earlier, on September 26th, we have our budget hearing and our annual meeting. That'll be at the West Bend High School Silver Lining Arts Center. And just as a point, that is not a school board meeting. We just need to, that's a meeting of the public, but nonetheless, we announce it here. And so encourage everyone to attend. That's what I have on our future board meeting calendar for the next month or so. Are there any other items for follow-up and communication?
I have a couple.
John, please.
I have a couple items I would like to bring up for future agenda discussions. The first being a discussion regarding school officials being able to carry firearms in school. As you've seen around the area, Germantown just passed that they are going to allow, according to the school board voting on it, but obviously it has to go to legislation. But I'd like to start a discussion on that to see where we got to go moving forward to see, next steps. Second is with school coming back, I would like to have a discussion regarding policy 381 and the violations with pride flags and BLM flags. I would like to just reiterate, the importance of keeping controversial issues out of the school. I know some of my kids have stated that there's these items in this classrooms, and I don't believe they belong there. So just like to have an open discussion on that.
Superintendent Weber will note those and identify kind of a structure for bringing those forward. Any other topics for follow-up and communication? All right, hearing none, that takes us to the end of our planned agenda. So I would move to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Joel. Motion and second to adjourn. Any final discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thank you for the discussion tonight, everyone.